Here I remained from May 1944 until January 1946, during which time I made a brief trip to New York, remarried in Denver, and became the father of a daughter, Valentine. Upon Keith Evans's return to civil life, we were obliged to seek other quarters. In January 1946, we moved to Anderson Creek, 3 miles down the road, where we rented one of the old convicts' shacks situated at the edge of a cliff. In February 1947, we returned to Partington Ridge to occupy the house which Jean Wharton had originally built for herself. It was towards the very end of this year that Conrad Moricand arrived, to last only about 3 months. In 1948, a son, Tony, was born. Partington Ridge is about 14 miles south of the Big Sur post office and some 40-odd miles from Monterey. Except for a pleasure trip to Europe in 1953, when I married again, I have been living on the ridge ever since February 1947. Topographical. It was 12 years ago, on a day in February, that I arrived in Big Sur in the midst of a violent downpour. Toward dusk that same day, after a rejuvenating bath outdoors at the hot sulphur springs, Slade's Springs, I had dinner with the Rosses in the quaint old cottage they then occupied at Livermore Edge. It was the beginning of something more than a friendship. It would be more just, perhaps, to call it an initiation into a new way of life. It was a few weeks after this meeting that I read Lillian Boss Ross's book, The Stranger. Till then, I had been only a visitor. The reading of this little classic, as it is called, made me more than ever determined to take root here. For the first time in my life, to quote Zandy Allen's words, I felt to home in the world I was born in. Years ago, our great American poet Robinson Jeffers began singing of this region in his narrative poems. Jack London and his friend George Sterling made frequent visits to Big Sur in the old days. They came on horseback, all the way from the Valley of the Moon. The general public, however, knew almost nothing of this region until 1937, when the Carmel-San Simeon Highway, which skirts the Pacific for a distance of 60 miles or more, was opened up. In fact, until then, it was probably one of the least-known regions in all America. The first settlers, mountain men mostly, of hardy pioneer stock, came around 1870. They were, as Lillian Ross puts it, men who had followed the buffalo trails and knew how to live on meat without salt. They came afoot and on horseback. They touched ground which no white men had ever set foot on before, not even the intrepid Spaniards. So far as is known, the only human beings who had been here before were the Esselen Indians, a tribe of low culture which had subsisted in nomadic fashion. They spoke a language having no connection with that of other tribes in California or elsewhere in America. When the Padres came to Monterey around 1770, these Indians spoke of an ancient city called Exelen, which was theirs, but of which no vestiges have ever been found. But perhaps I should first explain where the Big Sur region is located. It begins not far north of the Little Sur River, Malpaso Creek, and extends southward as far as Lucia, which, like Big Sur, is just a pinpoint on the map. Eastward from the coast it stretches to the Salinas Valley. Roughly, the Big Sur country comprises an area 2 to 3 times the size of Andorra. Now and then a visitor will remark that there is a resemblance between this coast, the south coast, and certain sections of the Mediterranean littoral. Others liken it to the coast of Scotland. But comparisons are vain. Big Sur has a climate of its own and a character all its own. It is a region where extremes meet, a region where one is always conscious of weather, of space, of grandeur, and of eloquent silence. Among other things, it is the meeting place of migratory birds coming from north and south. It is said, in fact, that there is a greater variety of birds to be found in this region than in any other part of the United States. It is also the home of the redwoods. One encounters them on entering from the north, and one leaves them on passing southward. At night one can still hear the coyote howling, and if one ventures beyond the first ridge of mountains, one can...